Right now, somewhere in the Formula One paddock, Ferrari is dealing with a conversation they probably never wanted to have. And it started with a radio exchange that lasted maybe 30 seconds during a race in Belgium. But that 30-second moment exposed something much bigger, something that's been sitting underneath the surface since Lewis Hamilton arrived at Maranello. It's not about speed. It's not about aerodynamics. It's about the invisible infrastructure that decides whether a championship-caliber team actually wins championships. Here's what most people don't realize when they talk about driver transfers in Formula One. When you bring in a new driver, especially one with the profile and experience of Lewis Hamilton, you're not just adding driving talent. You're bringing in an entire ecosystem of expectations, communication patterns, decision-making processes, and personality dynamics that need to fit into an existing organization. And if those elements don't mesh perfectly, you end up with friction. And in racing, friction costs tenths of seconds, which cost positions, which cost points, which cost championships. The Belgian Grand Prix was supposed to be straightforward for Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion, the most decorated driver potentially still actively competing in a car that's genuinely competitive. But by the end of lap 1, his race trajectory had already been compromised. Not by his own mistake, by George Russell, his former Mercedes teammate, in a contact that left Hamilton with damage and the 5-second penalty. Now he's fighting back through the field with a compromised car. And as the afternoon wears on, something else starts to emerge. Hamilton is questioning Ferrari's strategic calls, over the radio, during the race, for everyone in the paddock to hear. And then things get even more complicated. The pit stop comes in and Ferrari has a chance to do something critical. They could adjust his front wing, repair the damage from that lap 1 incident. But somehow the communication or the coordination or the execution breaks down, and they miss that window. Now Hamilton is out there with a damaged front wing, asking questions about why certain strategy calls were made. And the entire interaction between this 7-time champion and his current team feels like it's being held together by threads. By the time he crosses the finish line in 4th place, the narrative has shifted. This wasn't supposed to happen. Ferrari was supposed to be operating at a level where these kinds of gaps and miscommunications simply didn't occur. And that's exactly when one of Formula One's most respected voices stepped into the conversation with an observation that's been echoing through the paddock ever since. Tom Clarkson, the man who hosts Formula One's official press conferences, who has his finger on the pulse of the sport better than almost anyone, came forward with a take that was so specific, so grounded in actual tactical reality that it immediately caught people's attention. He didn't say Ferrari made a mistake with Hamilton. He said Ferrari made a mistake about who they put around Hamilton. And specifically, he pointed to Gianpiero Lambiase, the legendary race engineer who just signed with McLaren. Now, let's pause for a second and understand why that name matters, because it's not like Clarkson just threw out some random engineer's name. Lambiase isn't just any engineer. He's the engineer who has been orchestrating Max Verstappen's dominance in Formula One, 4 consecutive world championships, 4 years of watching how Red Bull operates at the absolute highest level, 4 years of managing one of the most intense, most demanding, most talented drivers on the current grid. And then when Lambiase became available, when Red Bull decided to move in a different direction, McLaren didn't hesitate. They moved fast. They secured him. They recognized that this wasn't just an engineer. This was an asset. This was someone who could fundamentally change how their team operated. And Clarkson's argument was essentially this: Ferrari should have done the exact same thing. They should have looked at what was available, understood the value of what Lambiase represented, and made the move that would have secured one of the most accomplished race engineers in modern Formula One history. But here's where the analysis gets really interesting, because it's not just about hiring talent. It's about understanding a specific problem that Ferrari was facing and recognizing that Lambiase could have solved it in a very particular way. Think about the dynamics we just described from Belgium. Hamilton questioning strategy on radio, a pit stop that didn't execute perfectly, a car with damage that couldn't be addressed. These aren't random failures. These are symptoms of communication breakdown. And communication breakdown happens when you have a driver of exceptional caliber, with decades of experience, with expectations built from years at another top team, integrating into an organization where the normal communication patterns, the normal power dynamics, the normal decision-making processes might not immediately align with what that driver expects. This is where Lambiase's specific skill set becomes relevant. Clarkson pointed out something that initially might sound minor, but it's actually quite significant. Lambiase is fluent in Italian. This isn't just a nice addition. In an organization as deeply rooted in Italian culture and tradition, language fluency isn't about convenience. It's about demonstrating respect for the organization's DNA. It's about being able to communicate not just at a technical level, but at a cultural level. But simultaneously, he's completely fluent in English, so he becomes this bridge. He's someone who can sit between Lewis Hamilton's world and Ferrari's world, and translate not just words, but context, expectations, and then Clarkson used a word that really crystallizes why this matters. He called Lambiase a buffer between Lewis Hamilton's presence, his gravitas, his 7 championships worth of authority and expertise, and the organizational structure of Ferrari. When you're a world champion driver at a historic team, your voice carries enormous weight. When you question a strategy decision, that's not a small moment. That's a driver with unprecedented accomplishment asking his team to justify a call. That question deserves a response that's intelligent, composed, and respectful of the driver's experience, while also being honest about why the decision was made. Lambiase has proven over 4 years with Verstappen that he can navigate exactly these kinds of moments. Max Verstappen is, in many ways, the polar opposite of Lewis Hamilton in terms of personality and approach. Max is aggressive, direct, unfiltered. He says when he thinks. He challenges decisions. He doesn't soften his feedback for diplomatic reasons. And Lambiase has built a relationship with him where that directness becomes productive rather than destructive. When Max complains on radio, Lambiase doesn't dismiss him or shut down the conversation. He engages with it. He takes the feedback seriously. He either explains why the decision was made, or if Max has a valid point, he escalates it to the strategist. It's a working relationship that's been tested in the highest pressure moments in motorsport, and it's delivered results. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that exact same dynamic would work with Hamilton. And that's where Alex Brundle enters this conversation, with a perspective that's worth genuinely considering. Brundle is a former racing driver. He spent decades in and around the sport. He understands not just the technical side of racing, but the human dynamics. And when he looked at this idea of Lambiase joining Ferrari to work with Hamilton, he raised a legitimate concern. He said, essentially, this could work beautifully or it could be a disaster. There's very little middle ground. Here's why Brundle's skepticism matters. Lambiase is known for being blunt. In radio communications with Verstappen, he'll say things like, "That's childish, Max," if he thinks a driver's making excuses or overreacting. He won't sugarcoat feedback. He won't soften criticism for diplomatic reasons. It's direct, it's honest, and at Red Bull, it works because the entire culture is built on that kind of direct feedback. Drivers come through Red Bull's junior program learning that excellence is expected. You're told what's required of you and you move forward. By the time you reach Formula One in a Red Bull, you've already internalized that you're going to receive direct feedback, and that's not a personal attack, it's how the organization operates. But Lewis Hamilton's career trajectory has been different. He came up through different junior categories. His formative experiences and top-level racing were at Mercedes, an organization that, while certainly demanding excellence, operated with a different communication style. At Mercedes, Hamilton had a voice in strategy discussions. His feedback shaped the evolution of decisions. He was consulted, not commanded. The dynamic was collaborative in a way that's different from Red Bull's more hierarchical approach. So Brundle's point was valid. Would Hamilton tolerate being told that's childish if he questioned a strategy decision? Or would that kind of bluntness immediately trigger a conflict because it's so far removed from how Hamilton expects to be treated as the most experienced driver on the team? But here's what happened next in this conversation, and it's the crucial part. Clarkson came back with a response that actually addresses Brundle's concern head-on. He said that Lambiase isn't some one-dimensional personality who operates identically regardless of who's in the driver's seat. He's an engineer who's proven he can work with different kinds of drivers, different approaches, different temperaments. The question isn't whether Lambiase would be the same with Hamilton as he is with Verstappen. Obviously, he wouldn't need to be. The real question is whether he'd be effective. And based on 4 years of championship success at the highest level of motorsport, that's pretty hard to doubt. This is actually a really important distinction because it separates the analysis from both blind enthusiasm and unfounded skepticism. It's saying, yes, different drivers need different approaches. Yes, communication styles matter. Yes, personality dynamics affect outcomes. But also, proven talent adapts. Proven expertise translates. If you spent 4 years managing championship-level racing and winning consistently, you've already learned how to work with different kinds of people, different expectations, and different contexts. So here's where we are in this story. Ferrari has Lewis Hamilton. This is the partnership that was supposed to reshape their championship trajectory. They've got one of the most talented drivers in the history of the sport. They've got a team with massive resources. They've got the infrastructure and the budget to build something genuinely special. But the Belgian Grand Prix showed friction. It showed moments where communication wasn't seamless. It showed instances where opportunities were missed because execution wasn't perfect. And somewhere, someone at Ferrari presumably thought, do we have everything in place to maximize this opportunity? And the answer, according to Clarkson, was we should have made one more move. We should have gone after Lambiase. Because when you have a driver of Hamilton's caliber, when you're in a championship window, when you're trying to build something historic, you need the best supporting cast you can possibly assemble. But McLaren thought the same thing, and they moved faster, and they got him first. Now, let's think about what this move means for McLaren. They're an organization that's been rebuilding, searching for identity, trying to find their way back to consistent championship contention. They've got Landis Norris, a talented young driver with genuine potential. They've got resources, they've got ambition, but they haven't won a championship since 1998. That's a long drought for an organization with McLaren's history and resources. But bringing Lambiase changes the equation. It signals something important. McLaren is serious about winning. They're not just thinking about next season, they're thinking about structural competence. They're thinking about building the kind of organizational infrastructure that produces consistent results. Because that's what Lambiase represents. He's not a one-off success. He's a systematic success. He's someone who knows how to build the processes, manage the communication, and create the conditions where championship drivers can perform at their peak. For Ferrari, the decision to pass on Lambiase is quite telling. This single move speaks volumes about the complicated interplay between timing, ambition, and the slippery nature of opportunity in the highest stakes arena in motorsport. To become increasingly relevant as the 2026 season unfolds. Because here's what racing fans know. Championships are decided by margins, by tenths of seconds, by whether your pit stop crew executes perfectly or loses half a second, by whether your driver and engineer are so well synchronized that strategy calls are made with complete confidence on both sides, by whether when your champion driver questions a decision, it becomes a moment of productive problem solving rather than a moment of conflict and confusion. Clarkson's argument essentially boils down to this. In a championship fight that's going to be incredibly tight, that's going to come down to details and marginal gains, Ferrari just gave up access to someone who specializes in creating those marginal gains, someone who specializes in the human element of racing, someone who's proven he can take a championship driver, or in this case, potentially a different championship driver, and help unlock their peak performance. The other element of this that's worth considering is what it says about organizational decision-making speed and clarity. Ferrari had an opportunity. It was there. Lambiase was available. He was coming off 4 championships. He was demonstrating interest in potentially new challenges. And McLaren recognized the value fast enough to secure him. Ferrari either didn't recognize the value, or they recognized it but decided to pursue a different strategy. Either way, it's a choice that's going to be scrutinized if Ferrari's campaign in 2026 comes down to those marginal moments where perfect communication could have changed the outcome. But let's be clear about something. This isn't a criticism of Ferrari's current engineering staff or their current strategy team. They're capable people. They've got smart engineers. They've got people who understand racing at the highest level. The argument isn't that they're not good enough. The argument is that Lambiase specifically brought something that was uniquely valuable in this context: his experience with championship drivers, his proven track record of managing high-pressure situations, his specific skill at translating between driver expectations and team operations. You know what's interesting about this whole debate? It's actually a window into how modern Formula One actually works, because it's not just about having the fastest car or the best driver. Those things matter, obviously, but increasingly, it's also about having the right people in the right positions who can optimize everything else: the communication infrastructure, the decision-making processes, the way feedback flows from driver to engineers to strategists to mechanics. Think about what happened in Belgium from this perspective. Hamilton crashed out with George Russell on lap 1. That's a racing incident, it happens. But then Ferrari had a chance to mitigate the damage. They had an opportunity in the pit stop to fix his front wing and restore some of his car's performance. Somehow that didn't happen. Was it miscommunication? Was it a logistics issue? Was it that nobody clearly owned the decision about whether to make that adjustment? We don't know exactly, but what we do know is that having someone like Lambiase there, someone with years of experience managing these exact scenarios, someone who knows how to ensure that when an opportunity arises, the team is organized and clear about what needs to happen, could potentially have changed that outcome. And that's just one race. That's one instance. Multiply that across a full 24-race season. Multiply that across strategy decisions, across setup calls, across how the team responds to unexpected situations. These marginal improvements, these moments of perfect synchronization between driver and team, they compound. They become the difference between winning and second place. They become the difference between a championship and a strong season. The broader context here is also worth understanding. Formula One has evolved to a point where organizational excellence is almost as important as technical excellence. The sport has become so competitive that every team has access to similar tools, similar technology, similar resources. The differences are increasingly found in how those resources are deployed, how efficiently decisions are made, how well people work together, how clearly communication flows in high-pressure moments. Red Bull built their recent dominance partly on technical innovation, sure, but also on organizational excellence, on clarity in decision-making, on a culture that breeds consistency. And Lambiase was a crucial part of that. He wasn't just managing Max Verstappen's technical feedback, he was embodying the culture. He was the human face of Red Bull's commitment to excellence and directness. So when McLaren signed him, they weren't just signing an engineer. They were signing a piece of that culture. They were essentially acquiring someone who understands how to build championship-winning systems. Ferrari had the same opportunity. They could have acquired that same piece of that same culture. They could have taken someone with proven championship experience and put them in a position to help Lewis Hamilton thrive in their environment. It would have been transformational, potentially, not because Ferrari's current team isn't good, but because adding proven championship management expertise to any team makes that team better. Now, what's going to be interesting to watch is how these decisions play out over the next couple of seasons. McLaren has Lambiase working with Norris Landis. They're positioning themselves as a team that's serious about winning, that's willing to invest in top-tier talent, that's building systematically for long-term success. Ferrari has Lewis Hamilton, but without that additional layer of proven championship management. They'll be relying on their existing structure to maximize his talent. The question that's going to linger, the one that Clarkson essentially posed, and that's going to follow Ferrari around, is if they fall short in 2026 or 2027, if they win a race or two but don't win the championship, if the margin between them and McLaren is small, are they going to wonder about that decision? Are they going to look back at Belgium and similar moments and think, what if we had someone like Lambiase there? Because here's the thing about opportunities in Formula One. They don't come around that often. Don't regularly have the chance to hire an engineer who's just won 4 consecutive world championships. You don't regularly have access to someone with that specific skill set and experience. When that opportunity comes, the decision to pass on it needs to be deliberate and well-reasoned. It can't just be about cost or logistics or organizational inertia. From everything we know, Ferrari didn't actively pursue Lambiase. They didn't make a competing offer. They didn't prioritize securing him the way McLaren did, which suggests that either they didn't fully evaluate the opportunity or they evaluated it and decided that what they had in place was sufficient. Both of those decisions might prove to be correct. Ferrari might win multiple championships with their current structure. But if they don't, this decision to pass on Lambiase is going to be one of those what-if moments that gets analyzed and reanalyzed for years. Because in sports, especially in a sport as competitive and as detailed as Formula One, it's often not the big, headline-making decisions that determine long-term success. More often than not, championships are decided by the countless small decisions that happen behind the scenes, decisions that rarely make the front pages, but shape every race weekend. It's these incremental choices that separate great teams from legendary ones. It's about whether you have the right person in the right position to manage the details, handle the human dynamics, ensure clear communication under pressure, and make sure that when opportunities appear, your team is fully organized and ready to capitalize on them. Formula One is often viewed as a contest of engineering brilliance and driving talent. But anyone who has spent time inside the paddock understands that it is equally a sport of people. Every decision, every strategy call, every radio message, and every split-second judgment depends on trust between individuals. When that trust exists, teams perform almost effortlessly. When it doesn't, even the fastest car can lose races. That's why Gianpiero Lambiase has earned so much respect throughout Formula One. His reputation isn't based solely on his ability to communicate with Max Verstappen during races. It comes from years of consistently making the right decisions under immense pressure, keeping emotions under control, and ensuring that every piece of information reaches the driver at exactly the right moment. His calm voice over the radio has become one of the defining sounds of Red Bull Racing's championship era. Lambiase represents something far greater than the role of a race engineer. He's the embodiment of organizational excellence at the highest level. Having someone like him inside your team means having a person capable of translating complex engineering discussions into clear instructions, managing the relationship between your championship driver and the wider organization, and ensuring that communication flows with confidence, clarity, and precision. Those may sound like small advantages individually, but together they create the kind of consistency that wins world championships. In Formula One, success rarely comes from a single revolutionary innovation. Instead, it comes from accumulating hundreds of tiny advantages over your rivals. Better communication, faster decision-making, cleaner pit stops, more efficient preparation, better understanding between driver and engineers. These marginal gains may only save fractions of a second, but across an entire season, those fractions become race victories, podiums, and ultimately championships. That is why Jeremy Clarkson's comments sparked such a fascinating debate, and why Martin Brundle's response carried so much weight. Neither of them was simply discussing whether Ferrari should have hired one particular individual. They were asking a much bigger question about how elite organizations build sustained success. Are you doing everything possible to maximize the opportunity you've created? When you invest millions into developing a championship-caliber car and secure one of the greatest drivers in Formula One history, is that enough? Or do you also need to surround that driver with the absolute best support system available? History suggests the answer is obvious. The greatest Formula One teams have never relied solely on superstar drivers. Michael Schumacher's Ferrari dynasty wasn't built only on Schumacher himself. It relied on an extraordinary team around him, including Ross Brawn, Rory Byrne, John Todt, and countless engineers working in complete harmony. Mercedes' dominance during the hybrid era wasn't simply about Lewis Hamilton's extraordinary talent. It was supported by Toto Wolff's leadership, James Allison's engineering expertise, brilliant strategists, and a culture of unrelentless excellence. Championships are always team achievements. That is why many inside the paddock place enormous value in experienced race engineers. They're not merely voices on the radio. They're trusted advisors, problem solvers, strategists, psychologists, and leaders. During a race, they process enormous amounts of information while helping the driver remain focused. They balance emotion with logic, urgency with patience, and confidence with realism. Very few people can perform that role consistently at the highest level. Lambiase has demonstrated over multiple championship campaigns that he belongs in that category. So when speculation emerged that Ferrari could potentially bring him into Maranello, many observers believed it represented an opportunity to strengthen an already ambitious project. Whether those reports were ever realistic is almost secondary. The discussion itself highlighted how highly regarded Lambiase has become throughout Formula One. Ferrari has already made perhaps the biggest signing possible by bringing Lewis Hamilton into the team. That alone signals the Scuderia's determination to return to the top of the sport. Hamilton's experience, leadership, and relentless drive for improvement could transform Ferrari's internal culture over the coming years. But even a driver of Hamilton's caliber cannot succeed entirely alone. He needs engineers who understand him, strategists who anticipate changing race conditions, mechanics capable of executing flawless pit stops, and leaders who create an environment where everyone performs at their absolute best. Every championship-winning driver in Formula One history has relied on that collective effort. That is why discussions like these matter. They're not really about criticizing Ferrari or suggesting that its current personnel aren't talented. Ferrari employs some of the brightest minds in motorsport. Instead, the conversation is about recognizing that Formula One has become so competitive that every marginal gain matters more than ever. The difference between winning and finishing second might come down to one strategic decision, one perfectly timed pit stop, one clearer radio message, or one stronger working relationship between driver and engineer. Modern Formula One rewards organizations that think systematically rather than emotionally. It's no longer enough to possess exceptional individual talent. Teams must build complete systems where every department works together seamlessly under pressure. That is the bigger message behind Clarkson's comments and Martin Brundle's analysis. It's about asking whether every possible piece of a championship puzzle is being assembled before the title fight truly begins. Ferrari unquestionably has one of the most important pieces of that puzzle in Lewis Hamilton. That's an extraordinary foundation, and one that few teams could ever dream of securing. But foundations alone don't win championships. They must be reinforced by outstanding leadership, operational excellence, technical precision, and unwavering teamwork across every level of the organization.